Hi, Tom Coley, coach for Steve Taylor Community Connection, and here with the boss, Mr. Steve Taylor, and Amy and Tim from the Monarch Grief Center. And gang, welcome. We're so proud to have you here.
Thank you.
There are universal things that happen to all of us in life, and one of them, unfortunately, is loss. People lose, wives and husbands and children and, grandparents, and so that's a universal experience. And I think it's so great what you're doing with your center to kind of help people handle that. I don't know if there's just one way to handle grief, or is there a myriad of ways people handle it differently, I would assume. So Tim or Amy, whoever wants to go first on this, what do you think?
All right. Yeah, we say grief is any reaction to loss.
Okay.
So there really isn't one way to do it. And I think that's what trips up a lot of people. Because one of the most common comments that we get is, I'm not doing this right, or something is wrong with me. I'm going crazy. I can't get control of this. So, because a lot of people think that grief is just sadness and crying and depression, but it's actually so much more. I mean, there can be anger, there can be bitterness, there can be regret, there can even be some relief sometimes if it was a really long illness.
Yes.
So, and it's not just emotional, it's behavioral, it's mental, it's spiritual, it's physical. Grief is so physical, people can't sleep. It changes your appetite for a significant period of time. There can be headaches, there can be significant fatigue and everything. So grief is so powerful, and a lot of people don't realize how powerful it is until they're in it.
So, in the midst of it.
Yeah, like you said, everybody goes through it, and I think you provide a wonderful service. And we were talking off air, you're right here in Perrysburg, so you're a neighbor of ours, you're downtown, and I think you provide this amazing service. And we got connected through a mutual friend because you have an event coming up in September. So he said, we want to get involved and support your event, but then also we wanted to raise awareness for all you do right here in our community. Talk a little bit too about the event that's coming up and how people could maybe even get involved.
Great. So we're having the Sunset Soiree, it's called.
Nice.
This is our second one. So last year we had a great event. This year is going to be even better if it's possible. It's a great event with we have local restaurants who are very generous, who donate all kinds of items to eat for our guests. And this year we're going to have a band. Not Fast Enough is going to be playing for the band.
Oh my gosh, they're good.
I
really like them.
Yes.
Their lead singer's tremendous.
Yes.
She's really good.
Yes, and so we're going to do that, and then we also have silent auction. We have a little bit of a live auction. We have a little bit of a presentation, but it's a great night. Folks can log on to our website, which is www.monarchgriefcenter.org, and there's a way to get tickets there. So tickets are still available, but I don't know that they're going to be available for. They're going to sell out.
When is the event?
It is September 21st.
Okay, and where are you holding?
It is going to be at the Perrysburg Boat Club.
Okay, great.
Just down from.
Great location.
If Mother Nature cooperates, it'll be a beautiful sunset, hopefully, because it's a sunset soiree. So
I love it.
Hopefully we can deliver in that way.
So one of the things, I looked at your website and was reading a little bit about it, and I'd love for you to share the story about the name, the Monarch, because I think it's so influential in what you do. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Do you want me to do that?
Yes, please.
So we had the idea of starting the center. Well, we started it in February of last year, and we had the idea started percolating several months before that. And when we were talking about the name, we were just sort of weighing all of our options, and I suggested Monarch, and it was kind of like, I don't know. And I said, well, the thing about Monarch is, there's something about the caterpillar and the chrysalis and new life, and it's like, well, we don't want to get too what do I want to say? How did you describe it?
Transformational narrative.
Okay.
You don't always come out of grief a beautiful butterfly.
Right.
Grief is tough. So that was part of my hesitation with going with Monarch.
So then we talked about, Black Swallowtail Grief Center. That didn't have the same ring. I'm just kidding.
Didn't quite have the same. I agree.
But I was thinking about it. I have a background, years ago in a former life in marketing, and I thought, a Monarch really has a neat look to it. It's actually an endangered species, and so there's something about that. And so we kind of were thinking ahead. I'm like, someday we're going to have our own center, and we'll have a walking garden in the back, and we can have like milkweed and be like a spot for monarchs to to
Right.
thrive. I mean, we just got way ahead of ourselves, of course.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that's kind of where the name came from.
And in many cultures, monarchs are a symbol of people coming back to visit.
Oh, right.
So there's that.
Right.
Exactly.
We hear that actually
Yeah.
from our clients. They'll say, it's so funny. In fact, we had a client that reached out to us, and she said it's meant to be because I lost a child years ago. Whenever we see a monarch, we think of that child.
Okay.
And so, and we've heard that before.
And it's kind of like the cardinal thing too.
Yes,
A lot of people believe that
Yes.
very strongly.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's such a, Steve and I and Terry were talking about this. It's such a great organization. There's a need, and sometimes I think it's hard for people to reach out to, So if I call you, what's going to happen? Take me inside, take us inside the process. Somebody calls, they've experienced loss, they're not, I don't know who handles it well. I don't, I don't know. I don't know if anybody really does, but they're struggling. They call you. What's the process? What happens with them?
I appreciate that question because the first call is the scariest call.
Yeah.
We have people who are like, I had your number sitting on my counter
Right.
for 2 months.
Right.
And I just was looking at it and finally made a call. They make a call, and right now it's Amy and I answering the phone, so they're going to get one of the two of us.
Right.
And we take a little bit of information. There's some forms that need to be filled out online, but then we set up an intake appointment. And right now it's with Amy and I. We'll be bringing on another counselor in a month here, so we're still small. So the first meeting is just kind of where you at, what brings you in the door here. And the first meeting is emotional, right? Because you're telling the story to a stranger again.
Tim, is it
And it
difficult to
brings
get people to open up? Or when people finally come to you, they're ready to open up? Is that how it goes?
Typically, yes.
Typically, some people are still nervous, but then when you just, start letting them tell the story and find that it's a safe space where no one's
Yeah.
going to shut them down, because
Right.
what they've done is with friends or family, they've tried to tell the story. And even well-intentioned people shut the story down.
Right.
It's too painful. They don't
Right.
want to hear it.
Right.
So all of a sudden they have this open space with someone who knows a lot
Yes.
about grief, and it's like, yeah, this isn't abnormal. This is very normal what you're going through.
Yes.
All of a sudden it just starts coming out. So the first couple are hard, and then believe it or not, by the fourth or fifth session, a lot of the times we're laughing more than we're crying, and especially our support groups. People think, I don't want to go into a support group and
Right.
be crying for an hour and a half. I mean, yes, there is some of that. And again, the first support group's the hardest because you're telling the story again.
Right.
But then all of a sudden you feel an instant bond with these strangers who you've never met, but you're connected in that grief, because grief is lonely. You feel very lonely
Yes.
when you're in grief. And so when all of a sudden you're sitting across the room from someone who's experienced the same loss, and they're like saying the exact same things that are
Yeah.
going through your head,
Yes.
it's so validating.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So the services that you provide obviously is grief counseling for an array of different reasons. Obviously, we're talking about loss, and everyone has experienced the death of a loved one. Are there other forms of grief, like someone that maybe loses a pet? Sometimes you talk about pets are part of the family, but is it pretty open? If you're experiencing grief, you can call and reach out, and you're able to come in and have an appointment?
We have made the decision at this point, mainly because it is the two of us only, to address the loss of a person, the death of a person or a pet.
Okay.
We do definitely acknowledge that there are other forms of grief,
Sure.
or other reasons for grief, I should say, and those are important, but we had to kind of,
Absolutely. You would be
Set our-
inundated, I'm sure.
If we opened it up outside of death,
right.
we're looking at divorce and retirement and
Job
all those
loss.
kinds of job loss.
Yeah, for sure,
for
sure, yeah.
So,
You would have to put cots in your offices probably, right? 24/7.
Right.
For sure,
Right.
for sure.
Right.
Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, I'm sorry, boss. I was just going to say, it's interesting when somebody experiences loss. They talk about the different stages. Sometimes I think people think they have to follow the stages right, in order. I don't know that it would necessarily go that way. And then I think sometimes I've had people say to me, and they've experienced a tremendous loss, I didn't cry, and they cried like a year later, and they were incredibly emotional. They thought there was something wrong with them. You want to talk to that a little bit, because it's kind of normal in a way,
Oh,
isn't it?
totally.
Absolutely. you're pretty enlightened on grief here. I'm impressed here.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And that's stages of grief, we throw those out the window.
Okay.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross over 50 years ago. Appreciate that she started the conversation, but
Correct.
and that was actually for someone who was diagnosed with a terminal illness.
Okay.
That wasn't for someone who's
Yeah.
experienced the death of someone. So, yeah, and people do come in our office and they're like, I haven't cried yet,
Yeah.
and that's where we're there to say it's okay.
Right.
It may come in a month, it may come in a year, it may come in 10 years. It's okay. Everyone. Again, people think grief is sadness and crying,
Right.
and sometimes it's not. And I think people think the first couple weeks and then month, and then all of a sudden everyone else starts going back to life.
Right.
Life continues for everyone else, and then
Right.
that person is still like,
Right.
still in the numbness and the shock, and
Right.
almost a lot of people come in saying, I think I'm in denial because I'm not crying, or
Yeah.
like I just don't believe it, like I expect to walk in the kitchen and see the person. And that's not denial, it's just shifting to the new reality, right? There's a little disbelief in there, but if you're married to someone for 50
Sure.
years, all of a sudden you're supposed to just change your whole life and
Right.
expect it
No.
to be normal again, so it takes time.
And everything reminds you of that person or that loss. You can't escape that,
Correct.
right? You see that, well, we used to go to that movie, or we used to go eat at this place, and that's your whole life.
Correct.
So everything is a reminder every day.
Mhm.
That's tough also.
Yep.
You know, you mentioned new reality, and I think I lost my mom a few years ago. My mom and dad been married 50 years, and it was obviously a blow to the whole family, but especially my dad. And my dad comes from a generation, I think, when men didn't express their feelings, right?
Right.
And it was one of those things where you didn't talk to people, you didn't want to cry in front of people. But I think that's changed, and you know, I
Yes.
think especially even during COVID, I think even talking to people became so much more accepted.
Yes.
And I think what you're providing people is amazing. I think, you know, the barriers are broken down. It's okay
Yes.
for guys to cry.
Mhm.
I had a phone call this morning with a buddy I went to preschool with. Preschool, grade
Oh
school,
my
high school,
Yeah.
good buddy. He had put his dog down, 16-and-a-half-year-old dog. He had put him down yesterday. He said he cried like a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And,
gut-wrenching.
you know, and it's tough. And I think, you know, I just went through it with a dog, and he and I talked.
Yeah.
And so you're able to share some of those things where maybe a few years earlier, guys wouldn't want to have those conversations, you know? So, but I think the service you provide and giving people a safe space and saying, hey, here's an opportunity to come in and be able to talk to someone and share those feelings, I think it would have done my dad some wonders too, you know? Because
Yes.
I think he held a lot of that in.
Sure.
So I appreciate what you guys do, especially in our community or here in our backyard.
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit too about just if people want to reach out or what are the services you provide and,
Sure.
and how can they get a hold of you, things like that.
First, about the services that we provide. So we do individual and groups, and then we also have a component of education to the community. So for individual and group, people call in, go through the process that Tim outlined. If it's community education of some kind, they, you know, organizations can call in, whatever. We can come out and tailor a presentation to whatever they're looking for. So that's because grief literacy is severely lacking overall, I think, you know, we
Oh,
feel.
sure.
And so try to help people understand. Then as far as our services kind of outlined, obviously individual makes sense. It's Tim or I with the individual, or sometimes a couple, every now and again a family. I say that not because we don't offer that to everybody, it's just that everyone's process is different.
Right.
So, you know, using the example of when your mom died, you were grieving, your dad was grieving, but your griefs were very different because you had different relationships with your mom. And to that end is why we set up our grief groups the way we have. So our groups are very specialized, either by the way a person passed or the age of the survivor. So we have early life spousal loss, we have midlife spousal loss, we have later life spousal loss, we have a loss to addiction and overdose, we have a loss to suicide, we have perinatal and infant loss, because what we heard from a lot of folks, and you know, our background is in hospice, many of our hospices have groups that you can be part of, and they're great, but a lot of times they're more general. So you could go in and you could be, you know, a 23-year-old woman who just had, you know, maybe has had 3 miscarriages and is not understanding what's going on, with a guy who's 80-some years old who's lost his wife of 50 years. Well, again, both grieving but very different. Whereas we have found that when you get the people together, like midlife spousal loss is a great example. Those folks, when they've lost a spouse, sometimes it's a one income family or one income and part-time, and now all of a sudden the other spouse has to work full-time. They still got kids in school, they're parenting by themselves, they're taking their kid to college by themselves. And, you know, they're dealing with all these things
Sure.
that are major life events. And when, like Tim said, when you're in an environment where there are people who are like, I get you, I'm going through the same thing, there's magic that
A lot of
happens.
connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you two are so bright, and you, as Steve said, it's such an incredible service to our community. I'm wondering if there's probably already thought of this, but an outreach segment to it of people that want to help family members or whatever, want to help somebody that's experienced loss, but they don't know how to do it. You know, some people want to, they want the explanation. They want the whole process. And maybe the person at that time does really not want to do that. They don't want to share that. You know, it puts them in kind of they're like reliving it again and going through the whole thing again. So how do you interact with somebody who's experienced a really difficult loss? How do you help them without hurting them? You know, I think that it's probably something you deal with too.
Yeah, another really good question, because I think, you know, some people who are more willing to talk about grief feel like the answer is to talk about grief. And some people don't want to talk about grief, right? So I think you can ask questions, ask some questions. If they're not biting, if they're not wanting to talk about it, let it go, but don't walk away.
Got it.
I'm here.
Got it.
Let's just watch TV. Let's go for a walk. Let's go golfing. Let's go do something. You know, I'm thinking about you, because some people just don't want to talk, but they still appreciate being there, because grief is so tricky in that you feel so alone, but you don't want people to talk to you, but you want people to support you.
But you don't want to be alone. You feel alone, but you don't want to be alone.
Right.
You know, that it really is. I mean, Steve's right. What you're doing is, you know, there's such a need for that, and maybe we can help some people just indirectly, because you've been great today. We've done this thousands of times.
Yeah.
You two are really terrific.
We can keep talking. Share again the date and the location and the name of the event.
Sunset Soiree,
Yep.
September 21st, 5:30 p.m. at the Perrysburg Boat Club. www.monarchgriefcenter.com to get tickets.
.org.
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 Fix that.
.org.
Shanna will be on it. And you know, soiree, if you spotted Cross and I 10 of the letters, we couldn't spell soiree. So I just let you know that. It may not even have 10 letters, and we still couldn't spell.
Oh, good stuff.
Great.
Thank you very much for coming in today. It was a
Thanks so
pleasure
much.
meeting both of you, and thank you for all you're doing in our community. I think
Thank
it's a
you.
Great
Absolutely.
service. Yep.
Appreciate
We're lucky to have
Thank
you here.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks for everyone for tuning in to another edition of Steve Taylor's Community Connection. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.